Good evening, everybody. Ibn Arabi Society Kashmir welcomes you all, and it's our honor to introduce Dr. Hasan Azad. Dr. Hasan Azad has done his PhD from Columbia University, and the topic of his dissertation was Impossible Muslims, Hizb ut-Tahrir, the Islamic State, and Modern Muslimness. And Dr. Hassan Azad has written important papers and book chapters. For example, if I remember correctly, Thinking about Islam, Politics, and Muslim Identity in a Digital Age. And another paper was The Reconstruction of the Muslim Self, Muhammad Iqbal, Khudi, and Thinking Through Western Selfhood. And there was another wonderful paper that was Woolwich Terror, Surveillance, and the Impossibility of Islamic Reform. Besides that, Dr. Hassan Azad is also founder of Tahsil Commons, which is an online platform for different, essays, discussions, video platform, and that is, one of the beautiful things I have seen on YouTube. And he's also, active through his YouTube channel with the name Hassan Azad. So welcome Hassan Azad to Ibn Arabi Society Kashmir. We are really grateful to have you.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah, thank you so much.
Well,
So
thank you so much for the invitation and for the generous introduction. So the way I was thinking we could do this today in conversation with Akib, I was thinking we could. I tend to prefer sort of, as it were, informal back and forth. I think that can be productive
yeah,
of
so,
interesting discussions.
so
I mean, if you'd like, I could say a few words, just very
yeah,
short
please,
words by way.
please say something preliminary about the Islam and the digital age. What
Yes.
exactly what you mean by?
Sure. No, so something I've become rather obsessed about and by for a few years now is the question of digitality. And digitality, I understand to mean the our sort of being, our, how we think and are in the world is shaped by the digital technologies that we interface with. And this is something that some people are thinking a little bit about, but in my experience, not enough people are thinking about these questions. If we take a sort of Foucauldian reading of things, Michel Foucault famously in probably his most famous work, Discipline and Punish, um, we, he talks extensively about the ways in which disciplinary mechanisms go into shaping people, right? And he has this notion of subjectivation, the way in which the subject is formed is through these disciplinary mechanisms that very often are typically invisible to us, invisible in the sense that we're not always comprehending them, we're not always conscious of them. Something that I've had occasion to think about and say a couple of things about. I haven't written anything about this yet, but for me, it's very interesting to think, for example, that is very different. So a couple of people are trying to enter. So occasionally I'll have to, I apologize, sort of pause and let people in. But next time, hopefully, if we do this again, we'll set it up better than we have it today. So that I don't have to keep interrupting myself. But so currently I'm standing as I'm speaking, right? You may have worked out. So how we are, how we experience our bodies, right, is fundamental to how we also cognize. So sitting in a chair, for example, is a relatively recent, it seems like a very innocuous thing to talk about. Again, I'm trying to admit someone and for some reason it's, okay, so it seems like a relatively innocuous thing, sitting in a chair, right? But if we look at the history, taking a sort of Foucauldian approach to things a little bit, but the history of the chair itself is a relatively recent phenomenon as far as masses sitting in chairs, right? If we look at the traditional sort of Islamic educational context, historically, people sat on the floor, and the teacher, not always, but sometimes, would sit in something of a raised chair, right? And it wasn't like the modern day chairs that we have en masse. Now, why am I saying all of this? So it's interesting for me to think about how we experience ourselves, our bodies, how we think of ourselves, how we think of others, how we are in the world, right? I mean, again, through a Foucauldian lens, but not only Foucault, and others have written about this, this notion of embodiment is a very important notion, and which is not surprising for us, those of us who come from, say, a Muslim background or other traditional perspectives, whether yogic, Buddhist, Eastern Orthodox Christian, where it's the notion of bodily comportment is absolutely inextricable from how the religious practices are practiced, and how they then go on to shape a religiously oriented, religiously in sort of quotation marks, because Buddhism maybe traditionally is not understood as a religion, but you see my point that the creation of a certain subjectivity is inextricable from the bodily comportments and the disciplinary practices. Okay, so that's by way of background as well, some sort of theoretical some theoretical background. Now, so what does it mean now if we think of our experience of ourselves, our experience of other people, our experience of the world itself, if we are interfacing through digital means, right, which we're currently doing, and it's an amazing thing, right? I mean, technology is usually a double-edged sword, right? It it enables certain things, and then makes more difficult or sometimes impossible other things. So something that I'm trying to think about, and these are thoughts that are still ongoing, and I'm trying to develop, and because it's an ongoing thing, that what does it mean to be Muslim, let's say, in a contemporary context where we now, for example, gain our knowledge of Islam online, right? We interface with one another online. We learn from scholars who present themselves online, because every medium has its own assumptions, right? Whether they're explicitly stated or not. Famously, right, the very famous formula from the great media theorist Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message, right? In other words, the medium goes into shaping the message in a significant way. So my question, again, something that I'm thinking through and still formulating on an ongoing basis, what are the assumptions that are built into digitality, into the digital medium? Because the digital medium, as the great sociologist, who's also, as it so happens, at Columbia, Saskia Sassen, she spoke about this a number of years ago. She's really way ahead of her time in so many ways. She was talking about the way in which the digital medium works, right? It basically, it takes information, it breaks it up into little packets, and then sort of distributes it, and then it sort of, I mean, I did a really bad job of describing how it works. The point being, sorry, there's someone trying to get in again. So what does it mean for knowledge itself, which is broken up into little packets? Now we have, again, the medium is the message, right? So we know, for example, that Facebook as an interface, people engage on Facebook in a certain way, they engage on YouTube in another way, they engage on Instagram in another way, now TikTok, etc., right? So how are people then shaping the message, as it were, the message, let's say in an Islamic context, the Islamic message to fit the requirements of the platform itself? I think these are very important questions for us to consider, and I don't have a clear-cut answer per se, but I think we can begin by asking these questions.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Dr. Hasan Azad, in one of your papers, you have mentioned that there is a term which is Google Sheikh.
Oh yeah, oh Sheikh Google, yes.
In that in that background, you discussed that there was, with this kind of Google Sheikh phenomena, there was challenge of certain authority in Muslim tradition.
Right.
So could you explain it?
Yes. Thank you for reminding about that. There was, I mean, I think I wrote this paper a while ago, so I apologize if I'm a little rusty on the details, but The example I used was that of Tariq Ramadan. This was a few years ago now, 2014, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And he that year had said he was going to boycott um, the um, the Islamic Society of North America's annual conference because of ISNA's um, uh, basically I think it, as far as Tariq Ramadan was concerned, it had sort of made concessions to sort of a sort of Israeli-centric political thing vis-a-vis Palestinians, etc. So he then someone challenged him, or a couple of people challenged him in the American context, because of course Tariq Ramadan's not American. Some of the at least a couple, if I'm not mistaken, they challenged him and said, "Well, it's not really your place to say this. You don't know the American context." They were saying, right? And Tariq Ramadan retorted, "Well, for you to say that, you're really sort of not taking into account my own history, and I have many years of engagement in American context and in the West as such." Anyway, so then he went on to kind of sort of the opposite of downplay. He sort of raised up his own qualifications and things like that. In any case, what transpired as a result of this exchange was, you know, there was, in my experience, something in my sort of analysis, something of a measuring of authority, right? Because some of the authority that Tariq Ramadan was giving reference to weren't necessarily traditional modes of authority. And how we now sort of position ourselves, how he positioned himself, was quite different from how someone would have positioned himself or herself historically in times before digitality, right? It's how authority is created today is very interesting, and it's very weird, right? Because authority is based on YouTube views and YouTube subscribers and likes and all this, that, and the other. Very often, people, very commonly, I've seen people with next to no knowledge, really any serious knowledge about whether religion or history or politics or philosophy, they make it, and I've had occasion to engage with some of these people. They describe themselves as new atheists. Excuse me, they explicitly describe themselves as ex-Muslims. And I kind of had something of a debate / exchange with a couple of them. And these guys currently are very prominent, and they have an axe to grind, which is an anti-Islamic sort of axe that they're grinding, and their pronouncements don't really stand up to serious critical scholarly inquiry at all. However, given the nature of the digital sphere, where their authority has come about because they have X thousands of subscribers on YouTube. Now they have a platform and they can say whatever they want. No, it doesn't matter whether it's true or false. So the very nature of authority is being challenged, traditional authority. I mean, I know of scholars, extremely knowledgeable, phenomenally knowledgeable scholars by any measure, and yet they are not widely known, or they're not known well enough. And most likely because they maybe from a traditional, they're quite traditionally oriented perhaps. So out of a sense of modesty, they haven't been promoting themselves online, 24/7, that sort of thing. Who knows how these things work? But the very nature of who gets a say, who doesn't get a say, I can go on and on about this, but very quickly I'll summarize and say that we know that the way the digital sphere works. Oh, sorry, there are two people waiting, but let me just let them in. The way authority works in the digital sphere is such that, algorithms play a very major role in this process, right? So let's sticking with YouTube, for example. They actually have their own behind the scenes. We don't know, I mean, literally, we don't know exactly what goes on, but we can theorize with a significant degree of certainty that these algorithms are slanted towards certain things, towards promoting certain things and to demoting other things. I mean, I know there's some YouTubers who produce extremely brilliant content. There's a husband and wife team. They produce these brilliant documentaries, and I've heard them complain. They have a very sizable following, in hundreds of thousands, and rightly so. But I've heard them mention many times that their videos sometimes the accurate views aren't put up, because the politics of the very technology itself, which is baked into the technology, that's something we can't get away from, right? Technology is never neutral. Again, I can go on and on about this, but
Thank you so much. You have touched a very important point about technology, that it's not a neutral thing. So I just want to know more about it, because philosophers were always concerned about this technology, right? Before 70 years, I think Heidegger was also concerned about technology, and he told that us in one of his books, that don't think ever that technology is neutral. So it is sort of another aspect of being, another aspect of human. So you cannot just distance yourself from technology. It is becoming the part of humanness. So it's not
yes,
also neutral. And he was also saying us in a very cautious way, that it may become kind of anti-human in a sense. So could you explain what are the characteristics of technology digitality when it comes to the profusion of Islamic knowledge, when it becomes the profusion of Islamic knowledge, and then it becomes kind of sort of problematic in a sense to filter that right message from this digitality. Could you explain more about it?
sure. That's I think someone's
Someone, I think. Please mute your mic. Sodia Shah, I think. Thank you. Sodia Shah, please mute your mic.
um, so yes, no, that's that's great. Thank you for that. Now, uh, um, so what I mean, if I could speak a little bit before speaking about Islam per se, I think if we can cover some ground vis-a-vis, the nature of the technology itself. Um, so how some of the assumptions that are built into the technology. Well, something that's coming up more recently in recent years, and this has been a problem for a number of years, but it's now in recent years coming up, where excuse me, in recent months it's coming up more, where a very I forget her name, forgive me, but she made news headlines where basically, at least in sort of in the written format, that she she worked for Google, and she's a woman of color, and she was complaining about the racism that's built into the company and its policies, and many people have commented actually that the technologies themselves, in this case specifically artificial intelligence, for example, has significant racist biases. And she was speaking out as someone who she was in the, if I'm remembering correctly, she was in the to do with ethics in Google, like that was her, that was her job, and she was speaking out against it, and she ended up losing her job, which is very interesting. And then a lot of her colleagues, former colleagues at Google, were sort of supporting her and things like this. There are racial biases built into these technologies. What I contend is that this is my contention, because if we trace the history of these of digitality, where does it come from? It comes from Silicon Valley, right? And that's really the center. That's where it originated. These and then it's been what's the word? It's been spread around the world. And so who are most of these developers? They're typically white, they're typically male, right? They come from a certain socioeconomic stratum. And, we always necessarily, right? We have our own backgrounds. So they are very often, not always, but very often, I mean, it's not a huge, doesn't require a huge jump of the imagination to assume that they will have Eurocentric assumptions. about things. I mean, Eurocentrism is a huge problem globally, right? And this is something that is being written about, has been written about for a long time in you know, in an academic context. But for the problem is academic discourses very rarely, if ever, really make it into the mainstream as far as really shaping you know, things that matter. So I mean, my kind of radical assumption or assertion is that digitality, which originates in Silicon Valley, which comes from people who are imbued with a Eurocentric understanding of the world, and Eurocentrism, historically, if we trace the history, Eurocentrism, I mean, Europe basically, in a very serious way, created its self-image in opposition to an other. And of course, you mentioned Said earlier, the other being the Muslim world, the Islamic other, right? And that's something that has not gone away. I mean, if we read critical race theory, for example, I forget the scholar's name currently. He's very influential and has written some incredible works. Stamped from the beginning is Ibram X. Kendi is his name. And other very serious critical race theorists have made this point that that, you know, the kind of typical discussion that one hears vis-a-vis racism, let's say in an American context, vis-a-vis African Americans, right? That, look, it's just a question of education. If people are educated, then they will stop being racist, right? This is a very common trope that gets bandied around. Like Ibrahim X. Kendi's point is that, look, this completely does not take into account the institutions that are created and have been created over many, many generations to maintain these racist discourses, because it's a question of power and dominance. So anyway, I say all of this to make the point that we cannot assume by any means that Eurocentrism has gone away. And so these philosophies are inevitably, this is my radical point, but I will stand by it, and I could unpack it a little more, but I don't want to go on and on. Which yes, I just want to have an exchange. But to make this very quick point, then I'll pass it back to you. I will stand by the assertion that digitality has certain racist assumptions built into it, not least assumptions vis-a-vis the Muslim other, given its history. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So that means, Dr. Hassan Azad, we can say in a different way that this performance of technology,
Yes.
so to say, is an extension of Orientalism in a sense, because as Edward said, traces the genealogy of texts, and there is an inbuilt structure of certain stereotypes. So to
Mm.
say, in a parallel sense, there in the technology is certain sense of some inbuilt structures of stereotypes. So that technology is performed in a sense. So can we say in that way?
Could you repeat the last part? I apologize. Someone just said it's not
Can you
audible.
say
Someone come.
that the way you are telling about the technology, there are certain
Yes.
inbuilt stereotypes, and then technology is distributed and performed. Can we say it is in a sense similar to what Edward Said said about Orientalism? It's an extension of Orientalism, so to
Mm.
say, in a digital world.
I think so. I think that's a very powerful insight on your part. I really appreciate that. I think so. I mean, the power knowledge, the power knowledge. What's the word I'm looking for? The project of power knowledge that every civilization, right, is necessarily engaged in. In this context, in the Western context, the power knowledge, the institutions that go into shaping the culture, the discourses, right, the literature, and all and these all part. And not to say that, but they have aspects of it, right? I think digitality cannot be considered outside of that power knowledge project, right? I mean, we all consume now. I mean, pretty much. I mean, I don't know what the situation is like lockdown-wise in Kashmir, but I know in the UK, in the US, for example, everything is closed down, of course, with lockdown. And so everyone is forced to be online now, right? So everything from our knowledge consumption, from our consumption of knowledge to our consumption of religious media to our consumption of films and everything is mediated through this medium. My question is, this is amazing. On one level, the notion of the democratization of knowledge, that's what the internet was supposed to do. But at the same time, what is being excluded? Increasingly, things are being excluded. We see with the case of Trump, for instance, fascinating case where, you know, the sitting president of the United States of America was banned from Twitter. Like, this is huge. I mean, this is just you know, unprecedented in so many ways. So the point being, what is being excluded in the process? What is being allowed? What is being disallowed? I'm not convinced that it's just a free for all, because again, every technology has its every sort of context, right? Every knowledge, every context in which we learn, every medium through which we learn necessarily has its limitations. Anyway, I mean, I don't know if that helps if that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a wonderful inquiry. So I think I let others to come up with their questions. I asked many questions, so it's turn. Others may come up and ask Hasan Azad any comment, any question. So please come up. You can send. Yeah. Please, Ejaz sir.
I am Ejazul Haq. It's so nice to listen to your comments,
Oh,
Hasan
thank you.
Azad, and your
Would it be
insight
possible
about.
to see you? Would you mind turning on your video just so I can? It just helps for me to engage.
Yeah, it helps.
Sure.
As I say, it's always, you know, eye to eye. Eyes communicate more than anything else. So
Yes.
we need to at least see each other
Yes.
before we communicate. That is the advantage that this digital age has given us.
Yes.
That how far away we are, but at least we can talk to each other after seeing each other.
Yes.
Thank you. I was very keenly listening to your comments about technology and digitality. I have just two small points, and I hope your observation will help me understand the whole process better. One is when we phrase the title Islam and digital age. My understanding of the whole topic is that I think these are two overlapping, non-overlapping actually, you know, two different, two distinct realms that we are trying to marry forcibly. Islam, when we say, is faith that has some existential questions, that has some perennial questions to answer. On the other hand, digitality it's like a phase in human history. Like we had industrial phase, we had agricultural phase, the same way we are going through a digital phase. But faith on the other side is timeless, it's ageless. We don't have to understand Islam in the agricultural age and Islam in the industrial age and now Islam in the technology age. That is one point. Uh, Second is that when we talk about digitality, it has its own ethical framework. You know, earlier we had pickpockets, now we have cyber criminals, but essentially the crime is the same. Islam, as a matter of the structure of faith, gives us certain broader outlines which we can follow, irrespective of the fact whether we live in digital age or we live in industrial age. And this is one. Second is taking the clue from what Akib said, a very significant point, that is it the extension of the same project, as you rightly put and as you profoundly put, as knowledge power project that initially was laid down by Michel Foucault, then taken on by Edward Said and many of his students and followers. If we say that maybe yes, this technology is a part of that knowledge project, but at the same time, when we see the flip side of it, technology has empowered the rest of the humankind in such a powerful way as has never happened in human history. So if that, this extension of Orientalism, actually Orientalism was to set the world as the other and West as the one who sees it at a higher pedestal. But technology has rendered it flat, which is the theory as Tom Friedman, you must have gone through. The world is flat because it has leveled up all highs and lows, irrespective of the fact whether we belong to one creed or the other. So I'm sorry if I had gone a
No,
little longer than
not
expected.
at all.
So
No, 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 no. Thank you, Doctor. No, no,
these,
no,
these are my too humble,
no, no, no,
observation. Thank
no,
you.
not at all. No, no. These are very important observations. So, sorry, let me just. Oops, someone trying to get in. So, so the question of Islam on the one hand and digitality on the other. Um, in its fundamentals, of course, and one can talk about, famously one talks about the five pillars of Islam. We know, of course, and those things, as far as we know, are not going to change, right? And the fundamentals of the Shahadatain, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, these things we know. So uh, at the same time, I guess what I'm sort of and your point also about the digitality or the digital age um, being separate as well. I guess what I'm trying to hint at and sort of raise questions about is the way or is how is Islam, because another thing that that we learn from anthropologists, for example, that there isn't only one Islam, that Islam is a lived tradition, and Islam is interpreted differently throughout human history, has been and continues to be, and additionally, what that it's very context dependent, right? I mean, famously, and perhaps not, it's not known widely enough, but the scholars, historically, the traditional classical scholars, they understood just by virtue of being Islamic scholars that there can't be one judgment for all, right? The Sharia, for example, infamously in a Western context. I mean, I know I'm speaking to people who, like yourself, gentlemen like yourself, and scholars that already know this, but for those who may not be aware, that the Sharia isn't one single thing. That there was never one book made that this is the Sharia and this is how you live your life. The Sharia has always been a living tradition. It's an interpretive framework, very broad, generous interpretive framework through which the scholars, in their incredible sort of knowledge and wisdom, that they try to get to the truth of matter, and then they always say at the end of it, Allahu Alam, right? Famously, because only God knows best. Now, so why do I say all of this? My point is that if all that I've just said is true, which I would contend it is, it can be argued that these points hold true. And if Islam is something that's constantly being negotiated, just to give you an interesting example, as someone who likes to critique digitality, but I also spend a lot of time online. So this is the paradox. But I came across a meme yesterday, and it was like a screenshot of someone who took. Who was commenting, I think, on a tweet, and the gist of the tweet was, I imagine it was a younger woman. No age was mentioned, but she said, I'm a Muslim. I'm a single woman. I don't want to get married. I want to marry this Dragon Balls character. It's like a cartoon character. No, if I die and go to Jannah, will I have one of them as will he be my husband? Which sounds very funny and very interesting, and it is funny, but it's also very interesting. Let's also and if we put it in a context also of sort of anime and things like this. So there's a phenomenon actually, because Muslims, of course, we don't, those of us who self-identify as Muslim, we don't live separate from the rest of the world, right? Our Muslimness is consciously or unconsciously is in relationship to others. It's in relationship to one another. It's in relationship to other cultures and so on and so forth. Now with digitality, the whole thing's opened up. So in Japan, there's this phenomenon where men, I think typically, they marry cartoon characters. It's very bizarre. Like literally they marry cartoon characters. Anyway, how does this relate to digitality? I guess the point I'm trying to make is as context.
Banking,
uh,
digital banking,
sorry,
digital
someone speaking there.
yeah.
Yeah, did you have a point to make? Yes? No? Okay. Sorry, I thought you were making a point, but
No, this sound is coming from somewhere else. I'm alone in the room.
no, it was someone else. No, I wasn't referring to you, Doctor. No, I was asking if Mr. Ishaq was. Anyway, so
I'm just keenly listening to your response to my
Oh,
question.
no, thank you. No, God bless you.
All ears. I'm all ears.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it. No, it's occasionally it happens. This is, so technology is fascinating, right? When technology works, they have the term seamless, that it's like, it's supposed to be we shouldn't even notice it. But then when it kind of doesn't work, then we really notice it. We were sort of confronted by the very materiality of technology. But I guess the point that I was going to make a short while ago was, so how Islam is understood, how people relate to the rest of the world is going to be necessarily slightly different by virtue of the fact that we are in this digital moment right now, because I'm not, my contention is that the two are not so neatly separable, really. And again, to my original point, with which I sort of started right at the start of this, this sort of discussion, was that if we assume the Foucauldian understanding that there are disciplinary mechanisms, and forgive me for repeating myself, but I think this is an important point. For me, it's very important that if we take Foucault's understanding that the disciplinary mechanisms are foundational to the creation of our subjectivity or subjectivities, then what are the disciplinary mechanisms that are necessarily part of the of digitality, that are built into digitality and that go into shaping our subjecthood? It's because then those things will then consciously or unconsciously, more often unconsciously than not, they will be impacting upon our Muslim subjecthood and subjectivation. And this is kind of my larger point. Now, to your point about Doctor, about the flattening of the playing field, I think this was certainly the motivation of many people, some of the pioneers. They really believed, I mean, if we take their sort of public pronouncements at face value, which I think, I don't see why we shouldn't, they really believed in the importance of the democratization of knowledge and sort of leveling the playing field and sort of empowering people, right, with this incredible technology. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the pioneers of the internet, Marvin Minsky, said that, or I could be mistaken on if it was exactly him, but one of the pioneers said that, the internet is essentially an extension of the brain. So all of these things. Now, my question, and a question that is being raised increasingly as we see now happening, this is an unfolding chapter in this is a very interesting moment that we're going through as far as the history of digitality. It's a very relatively short history, of course, which is the incredible censorship that's happening, being done by, in an American context, for example, being done by companies like Facebook, companies like YouTube. I mean, YouTube is a subsidiary, is part of Google, of course, Facebook, Google, Twitter. So to continue to address your point a little bit about the question of the flattening. So yes, there are incredible facilitations, without question. I mean, I know I sort of suggested, and I kind of sometimes my approach can be, and I think it can be justified a little bit. But if there's an overemphasis on one side, sometimes it's necessary to kind of have a bit of an over exaggeration on another side to maybe bring about something of a middle point understanding, where generally the discourse, I mean, with due respect, Doctor, is the general discourse, mainstream discourse, is that the internet is an amazing thing, period. This is the way forward, right? I mean, that's a huge, a caricaturization of what you just said. I'm not speaking to you per se, but generally this is often an attitude that one can see. And yet, we have to very seriously ask these questions. Saskia Sassen, whom I mentioned earlier, the brilliant sociologist, and really she's thinking at the level of a very brilliant philosopher. She asks the question, oops, sorry, I kind of lost the screen there for a second. She asked the question, and she raises this theoretical point, that she's very interested in the penumbra, what she calls, the penumbra. So we have a street lamp shining and illuminating a certain area, right? So we see what we see because of the street lamp. Now she's interested in asking the question, what are the things that are disallowed? What are the things in the penumbra and beyond the light that so what is being left out? And I think these are questions that we have to ask as serious thinkers, as we all are here present today, that what are the things, while there are incredible facilitations, again, technology is a double-edged sword, so I'm just letting a couple more people in. Technology is a double-edged sword. It both allows incredible things, facilitates incredible things, but it also necessarily disallows other things, right? And I think these are questions that are only going to intensify as time progresses.
Thank you so much for your elaborate answer, and thank you, Ijaz, for your wonderful question and queries. I think we can take any other question if anybody wants to come up. Yes, ask it as well. So if anyone wants to ask any other question, please come up. Yes. So, Dr. Hasan Azad, if you could, I mean, it may be the last question. If you tell us.
Hello.
Oh.
Yes, please.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Yes.
First, in the beginning, I would like to appreciate that you have provided this platform to talk about a very serious issue. I am Shaukat Ali from Kashmir, from Pulwama particularly. Rather, it is an observation that what I have been myself thinking over from a pretty long period of time, that the topic that you have chosen, that Islam in the digital age. And I think that Islam is not something that cannot accommodate itself in any age, because Islam is meant to be, we believe in is that it is meant up to the doomsday. It is a complete guidance. So whatever media or whatever the way of propagating it, it will always keep itself intact with all the times to come. So we need not to worry that the digital age will do something that will do something wrong with Islam. But as the responsibility comes that the Muslim scholars, they should reinvent themselves in accordance with the challenges that have been put forth by the digital age. Because this digital age, which could have done a lot to hold Muslim brotherhood together, it has otherwise acted as a medium of segregation, because the sacredness has gone. We are living in the abundance of information. Rather, the information is accumulating day by day. People now, for example, I will quote 2-3 examples. For example, if in the tradition of Islam, tradition of Prophet, we say, for example, Muslim can be anything but not a liar. The digitization has helped Muslims as well to gather this information at very just at the clicking of fingers. But the sacredness has gone. Everybody knows that any Muslim can be any, he can come down to any level that is where we cannot think of, but he can't be a liar, but nobody speaks truth. This has also in a way helped the anti-Islam discourse, because this digitization, the digital age, it has also helped that to quote and misquote things, and because the propagation is tremendous, because the digital age has allowed us to within a jiffy of seconds the information goes viral, and before we can just redress things, the damage is so huge at internal level and external level. So I think we need not to worry, but we need to well equip ourselves so that we can better have we can say a kind of uh, a kind of cure for all this morass that has just come up.
Thank you.
So
Thank you so much,
I would
Master.
like to, what is your take on it? The resource person should speak on this. Is my point right when I am saying that it has the digital, in the digital age where Islam is actually focused upon the practice, not only the verbal propagation. And digital age has allowed us to just propagate things, just accumulate information, and leaving aside the practice part. That is the major thing what Islam propagates. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think your points are certainly well taken and important points that ultimately, I mean, one has to, from a theological point of view, one has to say that God is in charge, right? We should ultimately always rest and we should assure ourselves and reassure ourselves always that God is always in charge, and nothing befalls us, whether good or bad, except it this it is preordained, and nothing happens except by God's will. And to your point, sir, that Islam will be fine. And this I know, and this I agree absolutely, because who are we as human beings to the truth of God? If we understand Islam to be as it were a manifestation, I mean, which is traditionally understood, this is a descent of the divine of the divine revelation into this human realm. So that will always remain true, right? Whether we see in terms of traditional, so a traditional Islamic lens or traditional Christian or what have you, if people of other faith traditions, that those realities can never go away. At the same time, where I'm very worried in really, not to exaggerate the term at all. My fear is that there's some very powerful forces in the world that are literally antithetical to religion as such. There are very real forces in the world that hate religion. And I'm speaking of, I mentioned earlier the ex-Muslim atheists before. One of the reasons, this is not conspiracy theory, and this is, I know, I just happen to know this is how these platforms work, that if one takes a certain stance, like if one has an anti-Islamic, shall we say, stance, then those views will be propagated even more so by these platforms. They algorithmically do this. This is not conspiracy theory. There's certain viewpoints that gel with these very powerful companies. They have their own policies, and very often they're in conversation with one another. It was revealed not too long ago that Facebook and Twitter outwardly, I mean, of course, as far as businesses are concerned, they're their rivals, right? But at the same time, they actually exchange notes as far as who to sort of who to ban, who to promote. It's very interesting, and so I'm not quietly skeptical. I'm very verbally skeptical, because if we bring into this whole mix the question of artificial intelligence, the rate at which, and I didn't have a chance to speak too much about artificial intelligence, is another sort of area of my sort of one of my research obsessions, shall we say, and the two kind of go together, digitality, sort of digitality and artificial intelligence. The rate at which artificial intelligence is being developed is absolutely mind-boggling. to the point where they're very serious people with, I mean, and very serious companies such as Google and otherwise, that they are in a race. It's been described as the artificial intelligence arms race, because it's understood whichever country, China's engaged in this as well, I imagine Russia also, all the big players, that whoever, it's understood that whoever is able to create artificial intelligence, have artificial intelligence supremacy in the world, they will literally rule the world. And artificial intelligence, this is not science fiction. This is very real. Some very, very serious people have been talking about this and been speaking against this. And so what we have coming on the horizon, I think we're going to witness some very radical shifts in the coming months and years. The very fact that during the course of lockdown, as a result of lockdown, so I've been aware of, you know, the sort of imminence of the arrival of virtual VR, right? Because this has been a thing for a long time. Again, major companies, Facebook and others, Facebook owns Oculus, right? Formerly Oculus Rift, which is their VR company. They're spending billions of dollars in the VR industry because they know that this is the next play as far as business is concerned, right? What we have right now, this kind of this flat screen, you know, which is great, but it's, you know, it's not that convincing. This is like old as far as what's coming next. And anyway, so I remember thinking to myself, who and why on earth would people ever adopt VR technology? But then lockdown came about, and then I said, oh, now I know why lockdown. Now I know why people adopt VR, and I know people who actually have already bought headsets, and so this is the next stage. So talking about Islam and even if we put aside the sort of religious aspect of things, just in terms of what it means to be a human being, if we are immersed in a completely artificial reality where our brains literally cannot tell the difference between that which is fake. I mean, these technologies are advancing so fast, VR technologies, that the brain is convinced that what it sees through these goggles are actually real. So, I mean, who's to say, excuse me, I'm getting a bit too excited, who's to say that what are we going to be imbibing through these technologies? Only God knows. So I'm very, very skeptical, and not just skeptical, I'm very nervous for the future, very much so. I think we have some very dark times ahead of us. And this, again, this is not some sort of conspiracy theory stuff. This is not just me, you know, being like, you know, the end is near. And this is based, in all honesty and all genuineness, on a number of years of research now. Again, some very significant people are talking about this, very serious philosophers, Nick Bostrom being one of them, who's at Oxford. Anyway.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hasan Azad, for your
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Master Shaukat Ali, for your question. I
Sir,
think,
but I would like to add one observation I would like to add, because recently I have gone through a book written by Cathy O'Neill, and the book is titled as The Weapons of Math Destruction. Not mass destruction, it is math destruction, because the book actually talks about this artificial intelligence and how it sways the world, where people will be left useless and irrelevant. And then Yuval Harari, who speaks about this very thing, what is the importance of reinventing ourselves through meditation and all that. And even he also thinks that the people of the future world, for example, in 2030s and 40s, where no exploitation will be done, because people will not be taken as resources. The elite would otherwise like to manipulate or exploit the masses, but people will become irrelevant. But one thing is there, that the journey is from going to become human from man. But these technologies, whatever they are, they can't substitute the peace of mind, because Islam is ultimately not thinking about your baser self. It is talking about your spiritual self, how your spiritual self will build the peace of mind, so that you will become relevant with your fellow beings, your neighbors. Because this digitization, no doubt we are having that challenge as well, where these algorithms are speaking that in future we will be useless, irrelevant people. But that doesn't mean that the practical part of Islam in the digital age That
I think Shaukat Saab, this point is taken by Dr. Hasan Azad. Yes, it needs certain thinking on the part of every practicing Muslim. So thank you so much for your question. If anybody wants to come up with any other question, so please, we can take the final question. We are running out of time. So I think, so Dr. Hasan Azad, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So the broader question is, if we follow from Shaukat Ali's
Yes.
queries, so broader question comes up with respect to the technology, that is it something more than an instrument? So as you already said, that it is becoming the part of the subject. There is no clear-cut Descartesian distinction between subject and the object. So it is more than an instrument. There are certain moral challenges to everybody from technology, from artificial intelligence. And these moral, ethical challenges are to every person, rather he's a practicing Muslim or a Christian or a human being, certain sense. So these moral challenges to a subject which is not distanced, which is not, clearly distanced from the technology, so to say. So this is part of essence of humanness now. So we have to ask these questions. Every religious person has to ask the question: what are the possible moral challenges from technology? Can we say it is a neutral? Can we say it is apolitical? Can we say it is immoral? So these are certain important questions, as Dr. Hasan Azad has raised in his session, in his commentary. So we need to think a lot about these questions. So final call from Dr. Hasan Azad.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Well, once again, I'm going to, right at the start when people were joining, I was thanking you for joining, and I wanted to sort of thank you once again for joining and for making time for us today. And I really appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate all the questions and your your generous presence. I think to answer Arkib's question, we cannot say technology is neutral. I mean, this is historic fact. This is philosophically to suggest that technologies are neutral, which very often is assumed to be the case. People sometimes will say, "Look, it's not. It doesn't matter. It's not a question of what the technology is. It's a question of how the technology is used." And I think that sort of attitude actually misses a fundamental sort of philosophical point, which is that that anyone, people who are behind, or the people who are behind the creation of certain technologies. In this case, we're talking about many, many, many thousands, if not potentially, it's probably in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who are behind creating some of these very sort of life impacting and changing technologies, digitally speaking. The people who are behind these technologies and the companies, they necessarily have certain assumptions. They necessarily have certain worldviews by virtue of being human, right? Every human being, there isn't a single human being, of course, under the sun who does not have a worldview after they've gone through a certain amount of schooling. And this is again referring back to Foucault's notion of subjectivation, right? That the subject formation is always happening by virtue of the fact that we come into a certain society, certain context, certain sort of disciplinary mechanisms, educational mechanisms, and so forth. So the people, because no one is without a worldview, they are necessarily imbuing their technologies consciously or unconsciously. They're imbuing their technologies with their certain worldviews, and sometimes these worldviews are very consciously done. I mean, there's no way to get away from that fact. It has been written about and commented on, and again, not known widely enough, which is that the CIA, this is not conspiracy theory, the CIA played a major role in the creation of Silicon Valley. So if that is true, which it is, it's historic fact, then the CIA clearly is not a neutral organization, right? So one has to, I think the wise attitude to life as such, and to technologies, perhaps in this case more particularly, is to have to maintain a degree of healthy skepticism. I think we should always maintain a degree of healthy skepticism anyway, but especially nowadays, where again, so I'll just very quickly finish on this minor point. Nothing is for free. Nothing is for free. If Google, Facebook, all these platforms are giving us stuff supposedly for free, which it's not, what are we giving in return for those services? And in this case, it's data. And the incredible thinker and author on this, Shoshana Zuboff, in her brilliant work, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. I mean, she's Professor Emeritus at Harvard. She's been compared to Marx. She's absolutely vital to think through in this regard.
Okay. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to listen to you and to your commentaries and to your answers. Thank you so much. It's our honor that you had with us. Ibn Arabi Society Kashmir is really graceful to have you. So we look forward to have you in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much indeed. No, it was really, really my pleasure, and really, thank you.